Hey guys, Dr. Frank here, founder of Addiction Mindset Recovery Coaching Programs. And in today's brief video, I want to talk about some of the problems with weed. I want to discuss some of the issues that we run into with weed. And I want you guys all to just take a moment and realize I'm not anti-marijuana. I'm not anti-THC. There's tons of medical benefits, and especially when it comes to the world of addiction and seeing people addicted to things like opioids and painkillers and benzodiazepines and drugs like that, I think weed provides an amazing benefit and an amazing potential to really be the superstar plant that it should be. So don't misinterpret this video, and I may eventually make some videos about the benefits of it for this channel. I'll keep that in consideration. But in today's video, we're talking about the problems with weed, and more specifically, the problems that can develop once you have that dependency and that addiction to marijuana. Now, here at Addiction Mindset Recovery Coaching, we help people quit nicotine, THC, energy drinks, and a whole host of other addictions. So if you're struggling, reach out to our offices and be sure to subscribe to our channel. I try and put out a video every single day on these topics. The first issue that we run into with weed, and I think my story is probably very, very similar to other people's who are quitting weed or who are trying to quit weed or who have quit smoking weed before, is it starts out as something fun. I'll be honest, if I go back to the first time I smoked weed, it was in college. I didn't smoke in high school. I was about 23, 24 years old, and I remember I was with some buddies at an apartment, and we were sitting around a kitchen table, very that 70s style, and it was a lot of fun. It was a good time. We smoked. We were laughing. I just remember having a really, really good time. And I remember more specifically waking up the next day, and I didn't feel hungover like when I drank alcohol. I was a little bit groggy, but I got up relatively fast, and I was able to go on with my day. And I just remember being like, wow, the music was so clear. I remember laying in bed with like headphones in, and I remember the food that I was eating really did taste so good. Just that typical stoner type lingo, I guess. So it started off really fun. Then it became something we would just do on the weekends. Instead of going out to the bars here in Buffalo, New York until 4 a.m., we'd smoke, watch, a movie, play a video game, whatever. I'd pass out by like midnight, and I'd wake up relatively early and get on with my life. And at that point in time, not only was it fun, but it probably was a better alternative than being out till 4 a.m. crushing 10, 12 alcoholic beverages a night. And the amount of potential that I stood to get in trouble with when I was out until 4 a.m. was pretty high, right? Maybe you're in a vehicle with someone you shouldn't be with. God forbid you're drinking and driving. Count my blessings, never did that. But there was a lot of potential for danger with alcohol, and I just wasn't experiencing that with weed, especially in the beginning. I would never drive stoned. I'd just kind of smoke at a buddy's at my apartment and just pass out, and that was it. And then over time, weed became something that I enjoyed it, and I got more and more into it. So I had bought a one hitter, I had bought a PAX 3 vaporizer unit, and it was all just dry herb that we were consuming. It was all dry herb. And it became something that I started to do on a nightly basis. I just said, okay, I'm going to go to school during the day. I was in college at the time, and I'm just going to come home and smoke at night. And that was kind of my routine. I'd work hard all day long in school, and as a reward, which I think this is where the trouble started, I would smoke at night. And I started to view that as kind of my reward for the day. And I was rewarding myself no matter what I did or did not accomplish during the day, which probably not a good thing overall. But weed was my reward at night. I'd work really hard, come home, fall asleep, watch a movie, whatever it was, take 1 to 2 hits. I was never one to get like super high. That just wasn't me. But that was great. So, okay, things were pretty good there. I can tell you, after about a year or two of that, it was definitely something I started to have to do to fall asleep. And I think that's where the first signs of dependency began. I would get very frustrated and aggravated during situations where I couldn't smoke. I remember even being on vacations trying to find weed. I'd be like talking to the busboy at a restaurant or the valet guy parking the car. I'd be like, hey man, can you get me some weed? Even when I was away. And that was probably, I should have started to get a little bit concerned around that point. But at that point in time, I didn't view weed as anything negative. I only saw it as positives. But I was definitely starting to show signs of dependence. I needed it to sleep. My mood would get real antsy at night if I didn't smoke. And I just become frustrated. I would get cravings in the evening if I wasn't smoking. And that's kind of where the addiction, I think, began. That's really where it started. So now here I went from just smoking every once in a while with friends to smoking every weekend with friends. And now here I am smoking every night just to be able to fall asleep. And this is now probably the age of 25, 26. I had my first edible somewhere in this process. And I think I've had edibles 3 times in my life. My first edible was a horrible experience. I was out with some people. We were, unfortunately, we were shooting some shotguns. I was like skeet shooting. No one told me it was an edible. I don't know why edibles were even at this event, but they were. And I remember taking it and being like, wow, about after 90 minutes, I was like, I feel really weird. And I'm talking to my buddy. I'm like, dude, something's not right. I got to go. And he's like, oh, well, you ate that entire edible. I was like, what? And I just couldn't comprehend the fact that here we were with shooting clay birds and there was edibles going around, and it was really a horrible experience. Naturally I stopped shooting and I just wound up laying down for like the rest of the day. It was a horrible experience. We won't go into the details, but I hated it. I hated the feeling. I hated the high. I didn't like anything about it. And then from that point in my life, I did edibles maybe 1 or 2 more times. And that's where I think we can start to really run into trouble. And when we work with clients, that's really an issue where I see a lot of problems when we start to get into mixing the edibles with the dry herb. And I'm going to save the true dabs or wax. And I'm going to separate that from carts, from medical carts, and then black market carts. And this is where things really start getting dicey, in my opinion, when it comes to addiction, where the lines really start to get blurred with weed. Edibles are very accessible. You don't have to worry about the scent. The high can last you, half a day if you want it to, and they can really incapacitate you if you want them to, especially if you mix that with like a one hitter or with a dab pen or a cartridge. Now you're really pushing your high. You're really upping the THC levels in your body, and this is where a lot of clients reach out. And this is where a lot of people are in trouble. They're taking edibles during the day when they wake up. They're smoking during the afternoon. They're smoking before bed, and maybe doing another edible in the afternoon. Or maybe they're taking an edible in the morning and then smoking a THC cartridge, either medical dispensary or black market, throughout the entire day. And when you have to be high just to get through your day, I think that's a problem. And I understand that there's people who use marijuana, and I'm a huge fan of it, for chronic pain and for anxiety and PTSD and all that stuff. But when we work with those people, we're always trying to figure out, were there other options that were never offered to them or that they never considered to manage those other conditions and manage those other symptoms? Even an option maybe being a stronger strain of CBD versus such a strong strain of THC. And that's where we start to see a lot of problems. And I think, when we talk about weed and when we talk about depersonalization and disassociation disorders, I'm starting to see a lot more of that. I experienced that, especially when I got to the ages of I think I was 27, somewhere between 27 and 28 years old when I started to smoke carts. I'm here in New York and we had the dank vape carts on the market. And I started to smoke that, and I remember the high I had from a dank vape. It was a horrible high. It wasn't a good high, but I kept going back to it. Like, I was very rapidly addicted to THC cartridges, black market cartridges, let me be clear. And I hated the way they felt. I didn't like the high. It was a high without character, as someone once said. And yet I kept doing it again and again. It was easy to do. It was the convenience of the cartridges. It was the lack of smell. Here I was, older, living at home because I couldn't afford anything because I was spending all my money on weed, alcohol, nicotine, whatever. And I got really hooked on the carts really, really fast. And again, I only used it at night, but when I talk to clients, when I'm talking to patients, Most people who reach out to me are struggling with carts, or they're struggling with like moles, a mixture of nicotine and THC in like a bong, or whatever you want to roll that. Those are the people who seem to be struggling the most. The people using the cartridges, especially the black market ones, the people who are hooked on the edibles, and the people who are combining nicotine and THC. They seem to struggle the most with withdrawals. They seem to have higher levels of addiction than someone who's just using your just generic dry herb that they're growing in their basement. And there's reasons for that, and I kind of listed some of those, and I've made other videos, and you can find those up top about the problems with cartridges and stuff like that. But this is where I think, due to the variation of types of weed, this is where weed can become a really, really tricky topic. And now with the access to all of these different types of weed, again, you can do an edible in the morning, smoke a cart during the day, and use some of your one hitter at night. I don't know. I don't think there's any justification to being high all day long. I don't know what the benefit of that would be. Obviously, I think a lot of people in that situation are trying to escape from something, and that's something that's still there. You're just trying to suppress it, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, over and over again. Now, if your quality of life is significantly better doing that than it was prior, okay, then there's no problem. Then you maybe you're not ready to be watching this video. But if you're getting to a point where you're realizing that weed is becoming a problem for you, where the negatives seem to be outweighing the benefits, and that's a really hard thing to admit with weed, when the negatives outweigh the benefits. Because I think at one point, like me, there probably was some degree of benefits. There was good times. There was fun. But if that starts to change, and for a lot of people, I do think that's as they get older, you have to start to realize and ask yourself, okay, is this really worth it? Is this really something I want to continue doing? And am I getting those benefits, those perceived benefits that I used to get at this point in my life? And if the answer is no, then you're going to have to consider that you've now developed an addiction on top of a dependency. And a lot of people, I'll make a separate video on addiction and dependency to weed, but a lot of people will say, oh, you can't get addicted to weed, only dependent. Well, that's definitely not true. You can get addicted, especially now given the high THC content in edibles and carts, and all the black market stuff, which has God knows what added into it. And of course, if you're mixing nicotine with weed, you can get addicted, because nicotine is highly addictive. So what I was saying, though, was if you're at that point where you're dependent, and remember, dependence has a dark shadow and it's addiction, you might need to start to consider quitting. And it's hard with weed, and this is one of the bigger problems with weed, because weed right now, there's such a positive movement behind it, and I'm glad. I want to see that. I want that to continue. But I believe in order for that positive movement surrounding weed to continue, we need to talk more about the addiction potential and not shame people who are dependent and who have become addicted to weed, who want to quit. It's okay that those people speak out, and we need to have a stronger message of support surrounding those people as part of the Pro 420 community, because if we ignore that, we're going to wind up in the same situation that we have with other pharmaceutical drugs. We can't ignore those individuals' cries for help, because otherwise one day it's going to build, and it's going to be, in my opinion, a detriment to the 420 movement. And we want to make it easier for those people to find help and find support who need it, because otherwise we're just causing the 420 movement more harm than we are good. And that's really one of the problems with, I'd say, weed, maybe more so the 420 movement right now, is that neglect and that disdain for people who are struggling, because we need to talk about that. We need to air that out. It makes it very hard for that individual to find help and quit, and it almost makes them feel like they're crazy, especially if they are suffering from depersonalization or disassociation disorders, which we see a lot of guys and people smoking the black market carts and doing the black market edibles. There's a lot of people too. One of the other problems with weed that we're seeing is cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, especially from the black market products, where you just have this constant vomiting, constant nausea. You've been to the ER a bunch of times, and the doctors don't know what's wrong with you. Your blood work looks good, your GI testing looks good, and you're sick, you're losing weight, you have disassociation maybe at this point, certainly depression from being so ill. And a lot of doctors aren't aware of this cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome in the clinical setting, in the ER setting, intensive care setting, in a gastroenterology setting, OBGYN setting. They just don't know what this is. And it's a huge problem right now, and we need to spread more awareness about this. And why is this becoming a growing problem? Cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, because of the higher concentrations of THC in products, and I've made a full video on this, people are just smoking very, very laced stuff. It's not CHS, and it's just withdrawal from other drugs beyond THC, even though individual just thinks it's THC. So I have tons of other videos on that. Be sure to check them out. And I hope this makes sense. I want you guys to follow me into the next video on cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, because if you smoke a lot of weed, this is something you should be aware of.